I want to start right on time. I've got a lot of ground to cover, and so I want to jump right into this. And we're recording this and we're live streaming it. Several people had asked about it, so we are. The reason why I wanted to do this morning was so those of you, especially those of you that have joined our church in the last 4 or 5 years, I can't remember when's the last time we showed our presentation, but I've only shown it once, and I can't remember what year it was. Maybe somebody else can remember. But many of you that God has brought to our church will have a better understanding this morning of why I have such a passion for missions. I look at these missionaries' kids sitting here in the pews with their families, and I used to be a missionary's kid sitting in the pew with my parents. In the early 80s, our family went to the Samoan Islands. Brother Savali is here this week with us. And my parents were missionaries in the Samoan Islands in the early 80s. And it's way down in the South Pacific, little bitty specks in the islands there. When you fly in, you can see the island. It's about 17 miles long. In some places, it's only about a quarter of a mile thick. And it's a population there of people that need the Lord. And we were there in the early 80s doing missionary work. Many of the folks that we witnessed to and brought the gospel to had never heard a clear presentation of the gospel. The Samoan people are very, very religious. They were congregational, steeped in religion. There was a lot of Catholicism and Mormons there and other religions, but very few really Bible-believing Christians. And my mom and dad, me and my sister and my little brother were there. We were there for about 2.5 years and just lived a life of just adventure. It was amazing. This is in our yard, cutting down bananas, and we had coconuts and papayas and mangoes and avocados in our yard. And if we got hungry, we could just go outside and eat a snack. We had a number of Samoans saved, baptized there at Utile Beach. Am I saying that right, Brother Savali? The Utile Beach is where we had our baptism. And we saw God really raise up a generation of Samoans. This was a young man that was just sharing a devotion in one of the services there in Samoa. And we had a little nucleus of Samoan people that just really paid the price. As Brother Savali said, their family turned against them. Their friends turned against them. They walked away from their culture and their traditions in order to follow Christ. This is Brother Lingi. We call him Lingi. His real name was Lingifo Ieti. He worked at the auto parts place, got saved, baptized. God called him to preach, and he ended up becoming the national pastor of the church there in Samoa. And we would have fellowships and functions there. These are some of the young Samoan men and families that we discipled. That was the nucleus of our church there in Samoa, and that was our life. We lived there, homeschool, and many nights that table there was turned into a discipleship table, and there would be 8 or 10 Samoan men gathered around that table as my dad would disciple them. And we had a little pickup truck, and just amazing stories we could tell about our time there in Samoa. And I thought that I had done all of my missions work. I thought I had done my time. I was good to go. And nobody was more surprised than I was when God came to me toward the end of my Bible college and told me that he was dealing with my heart about South Africa. I don't have time to go into the whole story about how God called us there. But Lord, let us raise our support in 10 months. We started in March of 2000. And in March of 2001, we left to go to the field, fully supported. To God be the glory. And I appreciate my wife being willing to follow me. And we had a website. We were cutting edge back then. Very few missionaries had websites. We had a very nice website. I didn't know how to build them, but I learned, Brother Caleb. I learned, spent many hours at night learning how to build websites. And it was untold-millions.com was our website. Interestingly enough, Marissa and Nathan now have that exact same URL. And if you go to untold-millions.com, that is now my daughter's website and her husband's website in the Philippines. But we had anywhere from 500 to 800 hits a day on our family website, kept it updated. God called us to the Free State province, right in the middle of the country there, of a province of about 3 million people, into the city of Bloemfontein. South Africa has 3 capital cities: a legislative capital, executive capital, and a judicial capital. And Bloemfontein is the judicial capital of the city. And of about 1 million people, you can go up on top of a hill called Naval Hill, and you can see the entire city and all the way out into the townships. There was a nuclear power plant there, and just another city right in the middle of, literally in the middle of nowhere. Like I said, there was a Supreme Court there. The Supreme Court justice lived in Bloemfontein, and there was a lot of modern parts of the city where there was McDonald's, Kentucky Fried Chicken, there was a Holiday Inn, there was a shopping mall there. We had, pretty much anything we wanted as far as that goes. There were nice restaurants, shopping centers, things of that nature. This was what many of the people in the city lived in. I couldn't find a picture of our house, but we lived in a house similar to this. They all had walls around them, walls and gates, a lot of crime in South Africa. So this is what kind of the middle class people lived in. But then you had a lot of the people in South Africa lived in these little squatter camps and these little townships, corrugated tin huts, makukus they called them. And you would have a family of 6, 7, 8, 10 people living in a little shack like that right there, just wall to wall. Many of these places didn't have clean running water. They didn't have electricity. South Africa is absolutely breathtaking. This is a Free State Province photo I pulled off of Google. A lot of the pictures that we took, our phones were old. Our pictures, the cameras were old back then. The digital cameras weren't high quality, and you'll see that in just a moment. But the Free State Province was beautiful. Many places had mountain ranges, and many places were just flat. But we just loved being there. It was dry. It wasn't that hot. It might have been in the low 90s, but it was a dry heat, so it wasn't like unbearably hot. But these were some of the men that we preached to and worked with. And I'd go pick them up in my vehicle and take them to church. And this was a picture of me. You can barely see it. I'm right in the middle, passing out tracts, witnessing to these people in the townships. Many of them would have a block house. They would have a makuku, and then they would eventually be able to build a block house and raise a family in these little bitty huts. And the poverty there in Bloemfontein was amazing. In the city, you had the BMWs and the Mercedes and the rich people driving around, and then it would just go 10 minutes, and you'd see oxen carts, people walking. And it was just amazing because we had almost 2 different types of cultures, 2 different languages, 2 different groups of people. The first thing I did when I first got there was started learning both Sesotho and Afrikaans. The Afrikaans was what the white South Africans spoke. And we had an old pastor's wife that would teach us some Afrikaans. And then we didn't need it. We just wanted to know the language so we could interact with the people. I really dove into the Sesotho language and wanted to learn as much of that as I could. This was my language teacher. Her name was Maureen. And she wasn't really a teacher, but she taught me a lot of phrases and words. And I could win the hearts of the people. And I would sit there every day and study the language and go out and then pass out tracts and practice my language. This was me and my wife. This is 2001, so I would have been about 29 years old when we first went to the field. And we were just kids, really, when you think about it. But our very first Easter Sunday, it was just my family. We didn't have anybody else there, but we all dressed up. And I preached on the resurrection just like they all didn't have a clue that Jesus rose from the dead. But we started out. That's an anthill that Stuart's got his hand on. We didn't know it was an anthill after we took the picture. Then we figured out that it was an anthill. That's how big they are out in the areas there. Our kids are so small. There's Stu, man. You can see our yard has a gate around it, has a fence around it. There was a lot of security. There's Spencer. He was so cute back then. And there's Marissa. She's now in the Philippines as a missionary wife over there. Grew up on the mission field, and she loves what she's doing. This was our vehicle, and I was trying to describe it the other night. This is what my wife would drive to go pick up people, and I would drive a little pickup truck. I actually had several while I was there. You've heard me refer to the graves. They would dig graves. I had a full-time backhoe operator in the cemetery there right outside the city, and they would dig 100 or more graves during the week, and then on Saturday and Sunday they would literally fill up every grave and start digging graves again. 40% of the people there had HIV. Tuberculosis was really bad. Just a lot of disease, a lot of sickness, and the cemeteries there just spread for acres and acres and acres. And I could tell you stories about their customs. They would stick bottles of water in the dirt so that people would have something to drink, and just a lot of really superstitious stuff that come off of their witchcraft and whatnot. But we spent hours and hours. You can see the kids there. There's Marissa in the middle. We used to pass out tracts in the square. Right in the middle of the picture, if you see a KFC. Hey, can I get a witness right there? Amen. But we passed out literally 2 shipping containers full of literature while we were there, pretty much by ourselves. And I would just go into the townships with a backpack, and I would just pass them out till I ran out. And our kids learned at an early age to witness, to spread the gospel, invite people to church, tell them about the Lord. One of the first things we did when we got there was we started a tent ministry. A church in Georgia had given us a tent. This was a seat about 250. I'd go down and rent a trailer and take that thing out in the middle of a field outside of a township. I'd hire a bunch of guys to help me set it up. And we would put a tent up and just start having services. And we'd be there sometimes a week or 2 weeks. I built a pulpit and an altar bench, and we just had a bunch of chairs. And we had some amazing experiences. I just put gospel meeting, just kept it pretty general. And I would have John Malokazi would start singing. We'd start singing about 6 o'clock, and I'd have a microphone, have a sound system, and I just crank it up loud as I could get it, and folks would just start trickling in, fill the tent up. I wouldn't preach till it was full, and they'd sing sometimes an hour, and they love to sing. They absolutely love to sing. These are different shots of the different times that we had the tent up, but I found a recording of John Malokazi. I got to let you hear a little bit of John. Isn't that beautiful? And he knew so many songs. Here we go. There is me, I will follow. There is me, I will follow. There is me, I will follow. I'll go with him all the way. Amen. I was able to find a cassette tape. I was digging through my cassette tapes, and I found a cassette tape of John leading the singing. And I want you to hear a little bit of what it sounded like when they cut loose singing. I can listen to that all day long. And every now and then I'd go get my piano, bring it to the meeting and play the piano and sing for them. And I would just pour my heart and soul into these crusades, and we saw hundreds saved. The kids would sing with me. And of course we didn't have any other special music, so I was pretty much doing all the singing and doing all the preaching. And of course they enjoyed it, and whatever we could do to get folks to come in. And once they came in, then we would start preaching to them. And I had Patrick Mothlomi was one of my translators. I'm still staying in touch with him. He's still preaching. He's married now. He's got a family. And I would preach. He would translate. And you'll notice on the communion table, there, on the altar bench, you see that little round device to the left. That was a recorder. And I would record my messages and put them on CDs or put them on cassette tapes. And I'd give them away. I had a duplicator. We just had so many different ministries and outreaches. But I would preach for at least an hour. I mean, they loved preaching. I loved preaching, so we preached. And we would see many souls get saved under the tent. And some nights we may have nobody saved. The next night we might have 3 saved. The next night we'd have 40 saved. The next night we might have 1 saved, just depending on how God worked. But it was a blessing to see the tent be packed out. We'd have all the chairs would be full, kids would sit on the floor, and we'd have church for 2 hours under those tents. And we traveled all over the country. I didn't have anybody to help me. Many of these that got saved were never baptized or discipled. I just would go and preach the gospel, and we'd fill out cards, and I couldn't find them. I mean, I'd go try to find their house. Their houses didn't have numbers. It was just an epic challenge just trying to follow up and disciple. So that's when I wrote my discipleship book. So everybody that got saved got a whole Bible, and I had to give them my discipleship book. And that was the best I could do under the circumstances. But you'd see them piled around the altar and get saved. I didn't have personal workers. I didn't have anybody to deal with them. It was just me. And I'd tell them what to do, and they'd get down there and pray. And then afterwards, they'd stand up and make a public profession of salvation. And, you know, we dealt with this old man right here. He was crippled. Rode on a tailgate of a pickup truck for 20 minutes to come hear me preach. He was in his 70s, got born again that night. And I didn't live much longer after that. These are just some of the men that were in the villages that, and this is Patrick on my right there, that was my translator. But God just gave me a heart for the African people, and I was happiest when I was preaching and singing and witnessing and soul winning. These are some of the ladies that got saved in some of the meetings. Here's Patrick trying to get their addresses. What a hoot that was. They couldn't tell you where they lived because they didn't have street names. They didn't have house numbers. This is just some of the young men in the meetings. And we held, I don't know how many of these meetings that we had, saw people saved. And I had people get mad at me and say, you should not get those people baptized and discipled. I said, how's one person going to baptize and disciple 5, 6, 7, 800 people? It's impossible. I was just trying to get them saved. Half of them probably had AIDS. I was just trying to get them saved so they wouldn't go to hell. So this is a lot that we did. I was able to record one of my messages on the new birth, had a professional man come in and set up a recorder, and I preached the whole message on the new birth, put it on video, and we would make those available to people. I was always trying new things. I'd have an idea, and I said, let's just try this. Our home church sent us containers. Here's a container that they dropped off in our front yard filled with Bibles and books and New Testaments and John Romans and gospel tracts. And yeah, that was for me to pass out. Grace was at home with the kids. You see my pickup truck on the left? Yeah, I found an old pickup truck. I'd fill the back of that thing up with boxes. I mean, the back of my truck would be level. I'd go downtown and I wouldn't come home till all I had was cardboard boxes, empty cardboard boxes. From the early morning till late in the evening, I was busy trying to reach that city with the gospel. They sent a risograph print machine. And that's when really I started, really changed a lot of my emphasis from just walking around passing out tracts, started writing tracts, started writing booklets. Our church sent me cases and cases and cases of paper. These are boxes of paper. And so I built some shelves and set up a little print shop in our house. And there's Spencer giving me a hand. My carpentry skills definitely came in handy on the field. And then I built pretty much a whole print shop in the back of the house filled with paper, and you see a stapler on the table there, and you see the collate machine on the top. And I would just write, and I had work translated, and I'd print them on this machine here. And here I am just writing tracts and writing booklets and pamphlets. And I realized that I couldn't be everywhere at once, but the printed page travels. And I realized that I could spend time writing and that people outside the city would read it for years. This was Isaac Modise translating a lot of the work from English into Sesotho, and so we had a very vibrant printing ministry pretty much the whole time we were there. And then we would get the people from our church to come over and help us stuff bags and collate, and we would fill those John Romans that we had gotten from Bearing Precious Seed. We'd fill those up with gospel tracts and church flyers and pass those out. Of course, my family was very involved. We did everything together, and I thank the Lord for my wife and my family. This is just one sample of a little booklet. I preached a message one Sunday morning on why do people go to hell, and several people got saved. God really moved on that message, and so I took that to cassette tape, had it transcribed, and I printed out the book, printed it, stapled it, folded it, and then we'd go out and pass them out on the street. Just within 2 days of preaching it, we'd have that book in printed form. And I spent many, many nights, wouldn't even sleep, working. We'd go down and pass out tracts in the cities, go out to the townships and pass out tracts and witness to people. And again, these are some of the guys that would come and help me. They loved me. They was excited about what God had called me to do. Patrick went with me nearly everywhere I went. The people spoke English for the most part, but you can find every now and find older people that didn't speak English that well. And I liked having Patrick there with me. My Sesotho was just conversational. I could just speak to them and relate to them and cut up with them and ask them a few questions. But when it really got down to witnessing, I couldn't do it in Sesotho. So I'd have Patrick there with me. So if an older person wanted to hear the gospel, I could give them the gospel. The Lord opened doors. I preached weddings. I preached funerals. We preached in the tent. We preached at the university. We preached in so many places. I mean, I was thinking about it the other day. There was hardly a week that I didn't preach 7, 8, 9, 10 times a week. Just week after week after week after week. And after every big event, funerals, weddings, they would have a traditional meal that they would cook in those pots. Those pots right there probably had sheep heads in them. And I'd preach in the schools, sometimes little small schools. I'd take the kids with me, and I'd sit there and I'd preach to them. And sometimes the Lord opened doors, and I'd preach in these huge schools. I'd preach to 1,500 students at the time. They'd bring me in for a revival, school revival in a public school, and I'd go every day and preach to 1,500 students. Teachers would be in the back. Kids would get saved. Staff would get saved. It was unbelievable at the liberty that I had in that country to preach the gospel. They invited me out to one school out in the township. I went. I was absolutely appalled at what I saw in the schools. It looked like something that had been hit by a bomb. This was a school. This was a school where kids went to school every day. Holes in the roof, pouring in water. This was the bathrooms. I mean, it was just the corruption where the people in the community would take the money that was supposed to go to the schools, and they would take it and go buy Audis with it and go buy Mercedes with it or whatever, and it wasn't making it down to where it was supposed to be. But 3 months after we got there, people started getting saved. People started meeting us in the stores, and they say, if you start a church, we want to come. And so we started Calvary Independent Baptist Church. 3 months after we got there, we had a handful of people for our first service. There's a lady there, I can't remember which one it is, but one of the African ladies there in the front was a refugee from Botswana. I've got a stone carving in my office that I bought from her the day that I invited her to church. She came and she was our first convert. She got saved in that service there at Calvary Independent Baptist Church. This is Helene Fushia, a precious lady. This is Sister O'Reilly, and she was never been married. She called herself an unclaimed blessing, but she loved my preaching. Amen. And then this was the Smith family. This lady played the piano, and their kids sang and played instruments. This is Brother Alvain, Sister Hanali, and their children. And we ended up using their swimming pool in their backyard for our first baptism service. There's Brother Alvain. He had been sprinkled as a child, as a baby in the Dutch Reformed Church, but he had never been biblically baptized. And when he started preaching on baptism, he came to me and he said, my wife and I want to get baptized. He said, I know our family's going to get hurt. They're going to get offended. They're going to get mad at us, but we've got to follow the Lord. And so Alvain and his wife and a number of the African people that were in that area, we were able to get them to the pool and get them baptized. This woman died of AIDS just a few months after this picture right here. But we look back now at what we were able to do and how many people we were able to pull from the fire. And I'm so thankful that we were able to go and what God did. While we were there, Callie was born. Callie was born. She was born premature. She had a lot of health issues. She was in the hospital, and the Lord really touched her. And she came out of it, and she was okay. But it was precious to have our little baby girl born there on the field. And to this day, I still call Callie my little African American. Amen. And then we had started having services. We moved from that one little storefront over to a school hall at the Aranye Macy School, and we started having services in there. And this was really where the ministry started to take off. The church began to grow. People began to come in. Every single service, we had visitors from the tracts and the flyers that we passed out, and a little nucleus of believers here. And every single one of these people had a different story, had a different background. But the one thing that united us was the doctrine, the truth, the Word of God. We had a lot of events and functions at our house. I think this was a Valentine's banquet that we had. But my wife and I mean, we literally every day, there was no days off. Every now and then I'd tell Grace, go pack a suitcase, let's go away for a day. But for the most part, we were 7 days a week, just wide open and pouring ourselves into these people and watching them grow. The guy there on the left, how do you back this thing up? The guy on the left, the black guy on the left, his name was Abisa. That's Abisa with a Q. And that little girl there in the middle, she's a pastor's wife now, right? Lizette, she's now a pastor's wife in South Africa. And then Alvain and his family are in New Zealand, still serving the Lord, and we stay in touch with them. There's my little family. I think this was probably on an Easter Sunday, if I'm not mistaken. Then out in the township, we had so many people saved in one of the tent meetings that I decided to go ahead and start trying to have services in a little township called Phase 7. I met with one of the chiefs, and they gave me permission to put up a building on an empty lot there. And so I was able to go find a bunch of used corrugated tin. And my years of construction came in handy. This is one of my greatest accomplishments, is building this hut right here out of 2x4s and corrugated tin. And I'm looking at these 2x4 ceiling joists, 6 feet on center, and I'm realizing I couldn't stand on top of that today. I could back then. That was pretty weak, I'm telling you. But we built that thing in 2 days. We had that Makuku church up. We had it up, and we had it going, and we got it painted, put a sign on the front. And we had a business meeting, couldn't decide what color carpet to use, so we just got all of it. Amen. Every color. I'd ride down the road and see carpet on the curb and just throw it on the truck till I had enough to put down on that dirt floor. And this was the inside of our church. And you want to talk about excited, buddy. I was excited when we started having services in there. So I had 2 churches, the one in the city and the one in the township. And these people, they said, we want to call our church CIBC, like the one in the city. I said, so we got a Calvary Independent Baptist Church. Yeah, we're going to be CIBC too. So we had 2 Calvary Independent Baptist churches, one in the city, one in the township. And we saw people saved. We saw people it was amazing what we were able to see God do. There's Isaac translating. I had 2 pulpits, one for me, one for him. And we saw God do amazing things. Our children just grew up. Missions was just life for them. They didn't realize they were on the mission field. That was just their life. That was their world. And this was one of the pictures we took one Sunday when we had a couple of missionaries come in to do some teaching and preaching. We took a group shot. I had several of these on my picture. There's another one. I think this might have been the first service that we had in that little Makuku church. And we just saw God save souls. We were able to move out of the Aranye Macy School, and our people, after giving and tithing and being faithful, we were able to rent our own little place, and we moved into there. This was the last year Grace and I were there. I've always believed in having good resources on hand. We've got a bookstore here at this church, but I started this in South Africa. These were all books and pamphlets that I wrote about every topic imaginable. I had a table at the back. Folks would come in and I just would load them down with resources. Find out where they went to church. They'd say, I'm charismatic. I'd say, good, I got something I want to give you over here about tongues and healing and the charismatic movement. They'd say, I'm from the Dutch Reformed Church. I'd say, good, I got something I want you to read over here about salvation and about baptism. And I would just load them down. And many times I was just forced to do that because I had repeated myself so much. I thought, I can't keep spending hours and hours saying the same thing. I'm just going to put it in a pamphlet or a book and give it to them, all right? And say, if you've got any questions, come see me. And boy, that was a blessing. We started missions, Faith Promise Missions. We had 6 missionaries. You got the brother Fonda Mervi and his wife were in Japan. They were actually South Africans, and they were in Japan. And the Krantz family in Bulgaria. Brother Jeff Krantz preached our missions conference a year or so ago. The Huffingtons in Australia. He's now working in a mission board in Georgia. You got the Kevin and Corley Hall, who we support. We supported them. She was from our church. Kevin came down, filled in for me for 3 months one time when I was taking a quick furlough, and he and Corley fell in love and got married, and now they've been missionaries in South Africa this whole time, and she was from our church. Brother Nathan Ching, who we support now, was in China, then he's in Hawaii. And then the Sorrells, we supported the Sorrells. Y'all know the Sorrells. He preached our missions conference last year, I believe it was, and built a pulpit. And I forgot about that, James. I did actually get to build a couple of pulpits in South Africa. I forgot about that. And the communion table. And then that's a baptistry. That's a fiberglass pool that I built so that we didn't have to go down to a swimming pool or whatever. And we would have baptisms there in the church. And you'll notice behind the pulpit, emphasis on world missions, God's greatest commission, our greatest concern. And I drilled it into our people there. You are saved because of missions. You're a product of world missions. You need to make sure that you get involved in missions. And this is just another shot of our church family. This was pretty much the last Sunday we were there when we came off the field to pastor Pleasant View Baptist Church in Taylor, South Carolina. But the couple all the way on the far right, that's Brother Rowan Mayer. He actually preached here several years ago. He and his wife ordained him, taught him, trained him in the Bible Institute, and he was solid. Him and his wife, solid, godly people. And he became the pastor and pastored there for several years. And now he and his wife are missionaries in England doing Bible translation work and Bible printing. But this was the little church. This is what it looked like when we left. And so we basically ended up merging the two churches. I could not pastor two churches at the same time. I did it for almost 2 years. Brother Joel, it like to kill me. They were 20 minutes apart. If my heart got stirred for one ministry, I felt it begin to ebb for the other. And I would pour myself into that one, and then this one began to be neglected. And so I'd go back over here and start trying to pick this one back up, and then this one begin to falter. And I just got to where I couldn't do both. So I ended up just merging both the churches, and I would send people out to pick them up. We'd bus them in, do whatever we could. And I just had to realize that I was just not able. This was Alvain and Hanley had a baby, and they had a baby dedication. In South Africa, the baby dedications are a huge cultural thing. They have the baby baptisms, and they would sprinkle them and all that. Well, we would have a baby dedication, and then they would bring their family in, and I was always able to preach the gospel. And we turned something that was a very big cultural thing in South Africa into a great evangelistic opportunity. We would give them a certificate, and we would see folks saved at these. And there's the baptismal pool that I built with the fiberglass inside, and fill it up with a water hose and baptize them. I'd stand behind it. I'd have to get in it. I got smart. We just saw many souls saved and baptized while we were in South Africa. And Rowan and Anya got married. She played the piano, and he became the pastor there of the church. You can see the time stamp there at the bottom. That's in June of 2006. We left in July of 2006 to come back home to pastor. But when you look at these pictures, it's almost impossible to convey how awesome it was. My wife and I miss South Africa, don't we, baby? We miss South Africa. We miss the mission field. We missed just the joy and the privilege of knowing that when you're witnessing to somebody, that it is possibly the very first time they have ever heard the gospel. What a joy it was to preach knowing that more than likely the person sitting in the pew had never heard a clear, not only a clear presentation of the gospel, but just a clear, solid biblical message, period. Their messages were so full of tradition and politics and the same thing that is happening here, the social issues. They weren't used to Bible preaching. And to be able to look back and see, I don't know, possibly thousands. I didn't count it. Maybe I should have, but I wasn't in it for the money or I wasn't in it for the numbers. It was just constantly people being saved. Probably thousands got saved in the 5.5 years that we were there. And I wouldn't trade anything for our children to have been raised around that. I came off the field, went to South Carolina, and we had culture shock for the first time in our life. We didn't have culture shock in South Africa. My wife and I have talked about this a bunch of times. She's agreeing with me. We did not have culture shock in South Africa. We loved it. It was awesome. Yeah, there were things that was crazy. There was things that we didn't like, obviously, but it was amazing. Then we came back to the States, and for us, it was culture shock trying to get Baptist church members to just go soul winning and tithe and come back to church on Sunday night. The people in Africa did it without any problem. You tell them one time, they started doing it. And then we came to the States, and it was like years and years of trying to get people moved out of their complacency and apathy and their comfort zone. And we experienced greater culture shock. My wife asked me no less than a half a dozen times the first 2 years we were back in the States, Stacey, can we please go back to Africa? Can we please go back to Africa? I said, God's called us here. And we pastored there for 8 years, and then God moved us to Baltimore. And guess what I am in Baltimore? I'm a missionary. Absolutely. This is my mission field. Amen. This is my mission field. This is how I look at it every single day that I wake up. I'm a missionary in Baltimore, Maryland, and this is my mission field. And now you know what makes me tick. Now you know maybe a little bit more why missions is one of my favorite subjects in the whole wide world. All right, you can turn the lights back on. I went through that. I went through that quicker than I thought I would. But you could get me talking about Africa, and I could just go for hours and hours. It was amazing, amazing, amazing to watch God work, watch God change lives, to watch people that had never been in church get saved, start tithing, start supporting missions, going soul winning, start family altars, raising their children for God. It was absolutely incredible. And so I'm here, doing it here. Been doing it for a long time, amen, loving every minute of it. And so we're going to take a break here, give you a chance to get you some water and use the restroom. And then we're going to come back in here, and we're going to have our 11 o'clock service. Thank you all for being here this morning and letting me share that little bit of my life with you. God bless you.